What team do you want to do now, Rich? You can pick one. Which would you?
I guess going to Vitality as their main rivals would be the most logical.
So, okay, just to run it down, they've got Alfari, who obviously was in Team Liquid last year. Selfmade remains. Obviously, he joined, although that's an interesting detail, because if people remember, he joined and technically his contract was going to run out at the end of the year. So it's interesting that they choose to retain him, because obviously people actually thought it was Leader was the one that they were going in on. But actually, listen, I can't blame them. They have replaced Leader because, spoiler, they got Perks, probably the greatest player to ever play who isn't fucking Asian. And then Kazi and Lavrov is the bot lane. So they've got the Mad Lions ADC, and then they've retained Lavrov. So the only two players remaining are actually the support and jungle, Selfmade and Lavrov. Initial thoughts, Rich? You've said you favour Fnatic, obviously, is the better team, but this is the main contender for you.
Yeah, so this is a case of like, if Vitality are going to win, in my mind, it'll be in spring, because I just feel like Selfmade is a ticking time bomb. I think if you go like player by player, the players are very comparable, right? Like I would favour, especially considering the down year Wonder had, I would favour Alfari over Wonder. I'd take Rajcula over Selfmade, but skill-wise, I think they're very close. If someone said they thought Selfmade was a pure better jungler, I wouldn't argue with them, but for the overall what do you bring to a team, I would prefer Rajcula, but it's close. Humanoid as a straight up mid laner, I would say is probably better than Perks at this time in his career, but again, we're tired of talking about it, but the amount of intangibles that Perks brings can't really be measured, so let's call that a wash as well. I think Upset is comfortably shown to be the better pure ADC in the last year, but a big question mark that I have about Kazi, because to be honest, I didn't really feel that off the back of this season that Kazi should have been in particularly high demand. I do not think that he was a better than average AD carry in the LEC this year at all. But what I did hear after digging or whatever is that supposedly he gives a lot in terms of how Mad Lions would play in the map. Yeah. Supposedly he was like a huge voice in that aspect. And if that's true, and if you can harness that on a new lineup, then of course that has a lot of value. And then, Lavrov, I think most people would probably prefer Hylissang to Lavrov, but Lavrov is a top 3 support for me in the region. I think you've got Hylissang, Kaiser, and Lavrov I would have as the third. Mcginis obviously fell off a cliff last year. So, yeah, I think Lavrov is really good and more stable than Hylissang, but obviously I think most people would agree that Hylissang has higher peaks than Lavrov. But player for player, they're very similar, and if someone skill for skill wanted to pick Vitality over Fnatic, I wouldn't call them crazy. I just think that I do not trust Selfmade, and also the problem is it's Selfmade in conjunction with two players who aren't necessarily toxic, and I don't have no reason to believe that they're super toxic, but do have big egos in Perks and Alfari. And I think the combination of Selfmade literally being probably the most toxic player in the league, combined with two other big egos, is a recipe for disaster. So, yeah, I trust Fnatic more than Vitality. That's mainly what it comes down to. Skill-wise, I think the lineups are fairly similar.
I'm actually on the opposite end. I understand what you mean about Selfmade, but I generally think he's like someone that is not going or cannot be toxic when he has players around him that are proven, especially in Perks' case, so much better and so much more accomplished and so much more diverse in their actual pool of like just not just intangibles but actually skill wise, that I don't think he can act up. I think he will actually. I don't say he's going to be submissive, whatever to a certain extent, but I think he's not going to have the same ego as he has with people that he can push around. Like at least from judging from the outside of how I think he sees the game, how he sees winning, whatever it is. So. I don't think him being a ticking time bomb is necessarily the issue on that lineup. It's more. I would say Alfari plus Lavrov Mephisto. Like, I think Mephisto is a good coach and everything like that, but he doesn't have the same kind of pedigree that someone like Dylan has over time. Someone like Grabs has, even potentially someone like someone like Yamato has. So the kind of respect that he demands is on a different level to the respect that these people gather and like have in it in the scene. So that's what it depends on. Like if his messages come across correctly, I think that will work. But it's always like a case of trying to negotiate your relationship with your coach and how you want to have that be done. So I'm not quite sure how they're going to operate in that regard. So if he gives the players a lot of space, especially Perks, I think it can go well. But he basically has to be a side piece and just look at the lineup and just be like, yeah, guys, do whatever you want to before he oversteps. And in terms of Lavrov, I think he's good, but I think he's weak. And I don't know how to put this, but it's when I saw him play, it feels like that he's oftentimes not the one at helm. So someone like Hillesang who's going to make the plays and is going to dictate whatever happens on the map. I think Lavrov is more like a good follow-up to the action already at hand. So there will sometimes, there will sometimes where he's going to make some plays, but he's not the Mickey X type, like who's going to risk the necessary misplay. It's more or less he misplays because he actually just misplays. He doesn't risk it. He's just like, oh, I made a mechanical error. So I think he's a different kind of player, and I'm not quite sure how that's going to add up to that lineup. If they had a more proactive support, especially with that entire thing, it will look a lot better, at least in my mind. That's at least where I'm at. I just can't judge how spring and summer is going to go meta-wise, because maybe supports that are going to be more reactive and going to be more lane focused are going to be prioritized. We don't know that yet. We have some inclination, but that's what it also depends on, like how the bot lane functions, how the overall team functions. So that's kind of my thinking where I'm at, but I could be entirely wrong. It's just my gut feeling right now. But the lineup, I don't think Selfmade is going to act up, and I think Lavrov is going to be someone that people may have headaches about.
Just very quickly on the Selfmade thing. I would give that view sort of a little bit more credence if Selfmade hadn't joined a lineup that had just made World Finals and still had, Reckless, still had Bwipo from that team, and then acted up the whole of the next year. So, like, to me, like, the greatest achievement that a Western team has had is reaching World Finals. Obviously, G2 did it and Fnatic did it. And then Selfmade was literally kicked for being toxic in the next year when he was playing with these guys who were, super accomplished or whatever. So I don't have any reason personally to trust that this won't happen again. Obviously, He's older, he's more experienced, he's hopefully more mature, I guess. But to me, maybe ticking time bomb's not fair, because obviously that has like an air of inevitability that he will explode at some point. I believe he will, but obviously, as you say, it's not guaranteed, and maybe Perks can tame the beast, right? Like maybe he can. And to your other point, with Lavrov, again, this is why to me it's really interesting with Kazi and how much of what people say about Kazi is true in terms of his comms and how he leads games. Because if he's truly a leader in the lane and you have a lane centric support, that could be really good, right?
I agree.
If so, those are the two interesting aspects for me.
No, to kind of elaborate on my point about Selfmade, it's like when I look at personalities such as Reckless and I look at personalities such as Bwipo, like I know Bwipo's outspoken, but I don't think he's the same kind of confrontational person that someone like Perks is. I think Selfmade is kind of like a modern day Forgiven in a sense. I think that's the best example I can give, and I think someone like that, if he kind of tests his limits, and I don't want to say this in kind of like as if I was some kind of psychologist, whatever it is, but it seems to me that way from the outside that he kind of tests his limits. Like, and if some people give pushback at some point, he's gonna be like, "Oh, I respect that. Okay, I'm gonna lay off of you. You're tough enough, whatever it is." And I think that's something that would probably happen with Perks, where he's not gonna push Perks around. I think someone like Reckless and Bwipo, in essence, are easier to push around than someone like Perks is, and someone like, for example, Mithy would be, someone like Soaz would be, like someone like me would be, so people like that who are more standing up for, I would say, more confrontational in nature, more disagreeable in nature. So I think that's where I think he's not going to have the same kind of pushing effect that he has had with other lineups before it. But again, I could be completely wrong, and you could be completely right. I think there's definitely there's going to be tension no matter what. That's going to be pre-programmed, so they have to deal with that in some kind of manner. Otherwise, that lineup is going to get frustrated on multiple ends very, very quickly.
Just call Reckless a beta. You want to. Amazing.
Here's the thing.
Use the word.
I'm essentially going to do it. What I'm going to say is this. I've actually seen this before with players like Forgiven, Dardoch, etc., from knowing these people behind the scenes. This is what happens, right? And it's why it isn't just those players that are the problem. Spoiler, go and look at most of those teams once those players are kicked. They get worse. So the reason why, right, that player ends up being the example of, like, everything wrong with the team, but then you kick them and the team gets worse. And one of the reasons is this. if you put a personality like that who is, let's just say, politely difficult to work with, like, you know, they're like very contentious. Essentially, by the way, the spoiler is most of them are people who really want to win and are really good. It's just that they only have a certain set vision of what can get them there, and they only really essentially know, like, look, give me all of the resources I want and I'll do my part. They don't really understand, like, you know, how do I help someone else, or how does a team function. They're people who, like, they're misguided, but they do want to win. What happens is this: unfortunately, these guys have terrible social skills and or communication skills, and so when they communicate that, it comes out as like just criticizing teammates. And the problem I've noticed that these guys have is if they're in a team with passive or passive aggressive characters around them, because if they're just passive, by the way, then that guy just basically takes the, like, I won't even say abuse in this sense because people will take it too far. I just mean like verbal abuse. Obviously, people will take the harsh criticism, right? If they're just passive, unfortunately, they sometimes just tank it, and then the idea is that's the guy that you actually think, oh, I think he likes me, doesn't he? And then he's the guy who just quietly votes yes to someone else kicking you. Or you get the true passive aggressive fucker. I won't name names, but they know who they are in these teams. And what they do is, it's like solo queue. They're the fucker that baits you into getting like banned from solo queue. They're the guys who are like pushing your buttons all the time, knowing that if they do it in a non-really toxic way, it's inevitable you blow up eventually. And then the key thing is, so everyone knows this in modern culture for the last 20, 30 years, especially with how, like, let's just say demasculinized culture's become. If you ever just in an angry way express that you don't like what's going on, you've lost immediately. You could be totally right in all your points. You could be justified that the person you're calling out, like, doesn't work hard enough or is doing a bad job. But if you do it in a way that seems unduly aggressive, you essentially lose because of your tone. Like, it just looks like you're the arsehole. And it's just easy to for the other four people to sort of just go like, yeah, get this guy out of here and all the problems are gone. So I think this is the key thing. I'm going to spin it back into this vitality lineup like this. This is the team that will actually tell you if Selfmade is toxic. Because I can almost justify Rich, the Fnatic one, on this line. One, you had Bwipo, who isn't like a toxic guy. He's just like a very back and forth guy, and he definitely is contentious. You had Reckless, who is passive aggressive and is a beta. Fans think he's just passive. No, he's passive aggressive. And then
oh god,
Nemesis is just all of that, just fucking spun into one. So it's like, mate, who's left? Hillisang, who just quietly just goes in and fucking tries to engage fights. It's about it, right? There's nothing left. So that's not the best lineup. This is the one that will prove it, because I'll tell you right now, Alfari just wants to win and is a quiet player. Labrov's a fucking fairly quiet player and just wants to win as far as I can tell. I don't really know where Kazi's at, but he seems like quite an amiable player, I'll say. I've never heard anything bad things about him. And Perks obviously is basically the greatest winner to ever don a jersey who isn't Asian. So if that team is too much for you, you're the problem, Selfmade. I'm just going to say that right now. Like, the analogy would be this: the moment I knew, even as a friend of his, that Forgiven was fucked in the head in an almost irredeemable fashion was in season 6. Because in season 6 he played with 2 different lineups. There was the Origin team where he had fucking Soaz, amazing, all these great players, and then he also played with the H2K lineup, and he thought both of these lineups, it was everyone else was the arsehole, everyone else like couldn't deal with him. And I was like, mate, we've gone too far now, bro. Like, you can tell me that when it's like Youngbuck or like some fucking, or like fucking Fox or something. You can't tell me that about like Soaz and fucking Yankos and like, these are the best players, you idiot. I said, if you find these teammates impossible to work with, there isn't a team left we can make for you, bro. Like, these just are the best players. Like, you essentially, you just can't deal with humans at that point in time. You need to go to another galaxy and find some other race of people who play. So I think it's the same with the Selfmade on this, and so I actually do kind of believe that like Perks essentially will sort of rein him in, not even necessarily like consciously. I think just being around Perks, like, if you don't get the vibe, mate, you're just going to be the one who gets out. And by the way, he's about 1,000 times better at playing fucking social/political games than you, Selfmade. So I just keep your fucking mouth shut in this team, mate. I just do what he says. Alfari, it's funny, right? Because everyone I know in America has spun this mad narrative that they almost, you'll notice, which sort of forced him to half agree with to be allowed back in the lineup, where he had to sort of low key admit maybe he was a bit toxic or misbehaved. Spoiler, he wasn't in any way. He was just a guy who doesn't really fuck with American culture, as far as I can tell. And by the way, I expect this year might be even better for him, because this is the year that he just finished crawled out of that fucking pipe of shit at the end of fucking Shawshank Redemption, and he's just going to feel like, I'm back in Europe, there's no more stupid Americans, there's no nonsense or political vibes I have to fuck with. I can actually just play top lane and be really good, and my coach isn't screaming in my face all day long, and then fans telling me I should just take it, and that's like, there's none of that bullshit. It's Europe, mate. You just play really well. You've already got Perks perks as well. Like, I think this is the dream for Alfari. And then the bot lane, I have my questions about them. Like, I think Labrov's good. I have thought, though, he's had some pretty good AD carries. They've never fully made it like an amazing bot lane. So I have some reservations there. It's the Kazi one that I don't get. Because here's what I don't get. Not only does Perks himself essentially, his entire banter against Kazi is like you are actually like factually sometimes shit, mate. That was his banter against Kazi. So I don't know why he's in a team with him. That's what I don't get. In fact, I don't get the Kazi thing in general, because there seems to be a divide, right? Players in the LEC seem to think Kazi's really good. Maybe it is something like you're alluding to. Maybe he's like some super like sleeper shot caller who's amazing from ADC. Because I don't get it watching the games. Like, he's one of those players where, as harsh as it sounds, I'm like, look, mate, I know on your resume it says you're a back-to-back LEC champion, but if we're just going off like ability, you don't deserve those titles. I'm sorry. Like, it wasn't you who did that. In fact, if anything, you were half inting some of those finals games, mate. Like, you looked like you were trying to fucking win for the other team. So that's my only problem. I still think it's a banging roster. I would probably give the edge to Fnatic overall. Like, I have certain reservations about the team, but I think it's still a mega roster. Again, I've been warning people for years now. They didn't get the super team last year. Spoiler, that would have been a Perks, potentially Alfari team as well. But they didn't. But they were always primed to try and make a team like this. And they clearly do have money. If people don't know, in CSGO, they're getting a team of players that are going to have enormous salaries. So the cool thing is this. I know it's been years and they've had all these like places outside the finish, but finally, I know they haven't been a playoff team very many times the last few years. This is the era where it's not going to be G2 Fnatic. It's going to be like G2, Vitality, Fnatic, and then throw in another team. You can pick a Mad Lions. And they're going to be right up there, in my opinion, as an org. Like, I expect from here on out, you might change your player, but your team's going to be mega. We're not going to have any more of those bullshit lineups that come ninth anymore from Vitality, I don't think.
Yeah.
No, yeah, sorry.
No, you can go.
I was just going to say, I guess that, as I said, the Kazi angle, that's based off what stuff I've heard from players and orgs or whatever, but it kind of has almost like Yarnan vibes, you know, where
it seems to be a big demand though. Like, G2 obviously were considering him. This is a guy who really could have gone a lot of places.
Yeah, that is the curious thing, is that this guy seemed to have like, it was him who's like, I'm deciding where I'm going to go, rather than I guess this team is the only team that's really offering me, so I'm going here. Like, I was just very surprised that it seemed to be like a battle for Mad to keep him versus can he be lured away by G2, or because remember it was G2 initially that was like heavily linked with him, or Vitality. And I'm like, what's going on? Like, the projected, you know, 3 of the best 4 teams or however many in the league, like fighting over this guy who, to be honest, skill wise, or in terms of how much he's shown from a, you know, actually output on the Rift wise, from what a viewer can see, has not been good. Like, objectively not been good. You cannot say he's been a top 5 AD carry, like, unless you have that inside information, right? So I do kind of see him as a Yarnan, where he I assume he just offers a lot more than what the average viewer can see. But again, that's still speculative, though. Okay. I don't say that with confidence. It's I just feel like it's probably the Occam's razor. It's Mad we're fighting to keep him, and other big orgs wanted him.
I think he's top 3 for sure. And where I base it in is like, I think his lane phase is kind of like a bit shaky. I think he sometimes makes misplays, but I think out of all the AD carries in Europe, I would say like the only one that is consistently 100% better is Upset, and then maybe actually it's already tough to name a second one. I like Comp just because when I was watching him play and when I saw him play in scrims too.
I assume we're ignoring Hans Sama because he's gone to LCS.
Yeah, exactly.
We're taking him out the equation. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so it's like maybe someone like Comp or like someone that ran, but I don't see any other player that who's definitely like or definitively better than him on average, and then also has the potential upside of the quick outplays. And what I mean by that is like, when you see, especially towards the end of the year, you usually have this evolution, right? Like the game speeds up. At some point, you have like this big breakout towards Worlds where the game is at the fastest point it can usually be, because you have the most amount of players like who've all brought in their metas, whatever, and then played against one another, and you have like this kind of like, you know, almost like a weapon war where they kind of like try to whoop one up on one another in again, whatever it is, you know. So it's like weapons race, yeah, exactly. So it's like, that's where I favor Kazi, and it may be just disbelief, but he's really, really good at understanding fights. And that is one of the rare qualities amongst AD carriers, who are usually more of the copy type, where they're more passive, they're more sitting back, and they're hoping that the team doesn't lose the game before they can put out enough damage. Kazi isn't like that, and Upset has adapted to the point where he's also not like that anymore. He doesn't wait for his team to win the game or lose the game for him. He actually makes plays for it. So that's where Vali Kazi, I don't know. That's my gut feeling about him. I could again be wrong about him, but when I saw Words and watched Words and I watched the year prior, he seemed to always be willing to make plays and like really knew and understood how to manage fights. And I think that sets him apart from most other AD carries who are more supplementary pieces to their lineups, especially this year. Like Hansama is gone. You only have Upset. Reckless is gone. So Neon is kind of like a bit active, but he doesn't really make the same plays. Xmatty has to first adapt to the LEC again. Then Unforgiven, like don't know much about him, gonna be quite honest. And Kobe Patrick, relatively passive. And Jesu may be the only one that you can kind of like push in the same direction of like an upset type, but he's still far away from him.
So to be honest, I completely disagree. If we're going based off like the pure level of play that the players showed last year, obviously I guess if we're discounting Hands and Reckless because they're technically, not in the league or whatever. Yes. But Patrick, for example, in the second half of summer, I think this guy was like light years ahead of him. I think both Patrick and Comp are better team fighters than Kazi. I don't think Kazi's a bad team fighter. I just think that Comp and Patrick are both really insane at team fighting. In terms of his level, even though it's obviously, was in the LFL and EU Masters, I'm not even like the biggest Xmatty fan, but I think he showed way more consistently like high level AD carry play than Kazi. I feel like Kazi just sprinted down half the games that he played last year, even games that they won. I feel like this guy was just dying in 2v2s like all the time, dying in key moments in the skirmishing like fairly regularly. I don't buy into the Kazi stuff at all. As I said, unless it is, whatever degree to which he is helping the team with the macro stuff or whatever. Even Neon. I would take Neon based on last year's play, honestly. Like as an individual, obviously his lane was a bit not amazing in general because of support, I would argue. But I don't think in terms of pure mechanical play, I would actually have Kazi like really near the bottom. I'm gonna give
you a historical reference, like to kind of like I think he's not a Kiernan type at all. He may help out the shot calling, but I don't think that's what it is. I think it's more about that he's willing to call plays and make these calls happen, right? So in essence, I would like historically speaking, especially from my own reference, I would compare him more to Wild Turtle, where at his worst he throws every game, and at his best he carries like every game. So it's like that conundrum you have to accept to a certain extent with him as a character that he's gonna be volatile, but I think at his best like his upsides are really damn high. And I think, as I said, like Upset and comp to a certain extent, just because I like Comp and I think he's like a sleeper agent or like a sleeper in general that people just don't really focus in on, are the only ADKs where I consider them better because they're better in lane and they're better in team fights, and they're equally as willing to make plays and they're equally as good as executing them as Kazi is to a certain extent. So that's where I see it. But
can I ask you a follow-up question to that?
Sure.
This isn't something that I even claim to know the answer to myself, but just sort of like theory crafting from an AD carry isn't the most important. Let's assume a base level of skill. So you have a base level of LEC level play. Isn't the most important thing that the AD carry not be volatile? I feel like when the AD carry is doing the highest percentage of damage on average per fight, and basically most fights are won or lost, generally speaking, by whose ADC survives the longest, right? Because they're outputting damage. Isn't the most important attribute of an AD carry dependability, that they won't choke half the fights they play?
It entirely depends on the meta, but I can see a sentiment. It's like if it's a front to back meta, well, if you have Kazi, you're fucked. Like, let's be real here. You're not really like if it's front to back, you're probably gonna be actually better even with someone like Kobe. You're gonna be better with Patrick. You're gonna be better with Upset, Reckless. Even potentially Jesu. So you have like a lot of ADKs who are above him. But if the meta speeds up, and I think that's why, for example, like I bring this Wild Turtle reference, is that when the meta speeds up, the amount of plays you make can replace the amount of missed plays you make. So what I mean by that is like you have so many more avenues to make plays, so you don't really want to go for a 50-50, but you rather look for game-winning plays at each and every single turn. And if you do it right, you can actually utilize the mid game, especially Kazi's strength is the mid game, to make up for some of the mistakes he may do in the mid game phase, because you just hit one quick play, get one objective, two objectives, and suddenly you're back in the game or even further ahead. So
he's a good opportunist.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to put it. So that's the best way to put it. He's a great opportunist, and he understands. Like he fits really well into any team that has any kind of like aggressive or shot like just quick play style shot callings that are happening consistently, and I think that's why I really like him, and that's why he succeeded in Mad Lions. Like, he would, for example, be terrible in a what would be a good example? He would be terrible in some like BDS, or he'd be terrible in something like even Rogue. He would be terrible in, because Rogue has such a controlled playstyle that's consistently reliant on like having the turns, reset, wait for their turn again. Like, Carzzy would literally int 10 kills every game in that lineup, but in other lineups where they kind of like find more plays with one another and they create more plays, I think he can be a great piece, and I think that's why I actually like him with perks especially.
Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.